I went and spoke at an event a few years ago, and they advertised that Jason Smith was going to be speaking, and I was sitting at a table having breakfast, just like you are right now, and I was talking with a person I was meeting for the first time, and they were so excited to hear Jason Smith speak that morning, and they were very disappointed when I was the one who got up to talk, because they were expecting Jason Smith, the NBA basketball player, who happened to be in the room on the same morning. And so, just in case you're wondering, I'm not that guy. I'm not that Jason Smith. But look, good to be here. Keep eating breakfast. We're a small group. It's a casual morning. You're going to get to talk as much as I am if that's what you want to do, like ask questions, interact. You'll probably learn more from the people at your table, possibly, than me, but I'll certainly try and poke the bear and provoke a little bit of conversation just from a little of my story. Good place to start is on a morning just like this, about 15 nautical miles off Plantation Island, which is in the Malolo Strait, just off Nadi in Fiji. I surfaced after a scuba dive about 7 years ago, and it was a great way to start the day. I'd been on a 21-metre plunge dive into what they call Gotham City, known because of all the batfish that filled that area and the big grey nurse sharks that would swim through and have a feed. And it was an incredible morning. And couldn't wait to get off the boat back to the resort to share with Paulina, my wife, and our 4 kids who were building sandcastles on the beach, everything that I had seen that morning. So as I sauntered up the beach with a big grin all over my face, ready to tell my morning's adventures, I could see already from a distance that Paulina didn't look that happy. In fact, she just about looked sick. And I'm thinking, what has gone on this morning in my absence? By the time I actually got to her, I could see that she'd been crying. And her first comment to me that morning was, "I don't want you to freak out, but something bad has happened." Typically not the way you start a good story, is it? Like your mind splinters into lots of directions when you hear something that vague, but clearly that bad. And I'm thinking, what possibly could have gone wrong? The kids all look healthy. There's no doctors. The management resort staff aren't here. There's no police. Like what possibly could have gone wrong? And every thought trajectory landed in a very unhappy place. Like all I could imagine, there's disappointment, there's pain, there's hurt, something's bad, and I didn't know which tragedy to hope for, frankly. So I just held my breath, to which she then handed me my mobile phone. And as I woke up the phone, I saw 24 missed calls. 4 of them were from my most senior executive back here in Melbourne, who was in charge of my business while I was in Fiji. One of them could have been from a lawyer who may or may not be sitting right in front of me. And my mum was amongst them as well. And when I clicked on the link in one of the text messages to find out what could be so distressing that I would have this many people trying to reach me, I saw the headline in the Sydney Morning Herald that day flash across my screen. And it read, "How on earth? Physiotherapy franchisees bullied and trapped." And it had a photo underneath that headline of my long-time 20-year best friend from school and now my ex-CFO looking very cold right down the camera straight at me. And my heart sank. In a moment, I thought, oh my gosh, I'm done. I am absolutely done for. Sydney Morning Herald has it's probably the number 1 masthead in Australia. I think it has a cross-platform reach of about 8 million viewers on a daily basis. just so happened that that article got syndicated across 18 other Fairfax publications, including Melbourne, leading print rag, which was The Age. And so I had catastrophized within 30 seconds that everybody I knew and everybody who loved me, and more importantly, those who didn't, were reading the same headline that morning. And it just occurred to me, not that I shouldn't go diving anymore, but it occurred to me that this was going to be the end of my business, that I was done for. And I would imagine you have had multiple circumstances in your world where you have got to the point where you thought the business was going to be the death of you. And it's funny because I love Harley Davidson motorcycles, and when anybody learns that I ride them, they fear for my safety. But I just comfort them by saying it's okay. I do something far more dangerous than ride bikes. I run businesses. I lead teams. I'm engaged in the blood sport, the hand-to-hand combat, right, of having to interact with people and do commerce day in and day out. Like, seriously, riding bikes is the safest thing I probably do during the week. Going to work, that's what you should be worried for me about. Isn't that how you feel sometimes? You know, the huge exposure, the vulnerability, the risk that we take on personally by starting businesses or running other people's, putting yourself in harm's way. Exposed, really exposed. Actually, I tried to get the bike in this morning, literally. Dave tried to help me. We were like about half an inch short of the elevator door, and I would have had the Harley sitting right there. You can see it as you walk down the stairs because I came on it this morning for that reason. Why? Because I actually want you to understand something about these bikes. There's Harley Davidson bikes. I'm glad you asked. I'm glad you show as much interest in them as I do. Let me tell you about this bike for a minute. It's a 2014 limited edition night rod. If that doesn't mean anything to you, let me add, it's a 1250cc water-cooled V-twin. It is a collaboration between Harley Davidson and a little-known German sports car high-performance company that you may have heard of called Porsche. They don't even make them anymore. You can't buy them brand new. This thing has a fuel-injected engine with 120 horsepower driven by a 260mm rear tyre, which actually means the engine and the tyre is bigger than the first car I bought, which was a 1977 Toyota Corolla. Like, this thing is the fastest street-legal drag bike on the market. It's the closest thing you'll see to a real-life bat bike, right? This is 300 kilos of missile. And quite frankly, the thrill, the adventure of getting on these things and riding them is very hard to explain. In fact, you just about have to experience it to understand it. And I reckon that's a lot like business, because we can sit here and we can tell stories, we can show the scars, we can read it in books. People love to give advice on how you should run your business. You know, it's like everybody's got an opinion, everybody's got a perspective. You know what? There is no substitute to you being on the seat, holding the bar, driving your own business, right? There is no substitute to running your own businesses, to feel the extremes, you know, to feel the acceleration, we get the wind through the hair, to get the bugs in the teeth. Like, this is real life, right? And so this morning I want to make sure that when we're talking about business, and when I'm sharing some of my stories, actually the focus that you're reflecting on is your current, your experience, what's happening in your world, and that you're sharing that with each other because you're in it. You're not spectators, right? And my story is pretty well irrelevant after about 11 o'clock this morning. And it's your story that really matters. And so you are in the seat. You are on the bike. You don't have to just read other people's books and stories. You're writing your own. And so if there's anything I can share this morning that might just help you imagine what your story is going to be, then I think it's worth getting up a little earlier than maybe we would ordinarily have done on a Saturday morning. I was in a room just like this many years ago. It was full of GPs, physios, other allied health practitioners, and I was trying to encourage them on how to grow their practice. And about here, right where Bernie is, there's a really miserable looking bloke. A lot of physios happen to be miserable because they're having a hard time in life and business. And he was having a pretty lousy morning as he sat there with his arms folded because, well, he'd had a 20-year monopoly in the small little regional town that he had been working, and had, a thriving business because there was no competition. But things had changed for him recently. In fact, he was telling us at the table he had this big blue sign that everybody knew in town was his practice. But recently, like a year earlier, somebody else had come in next to him, set up right next door, and they'd hung a sign which in effect promoted cheaper prices to the community. And he's now got some tension in his world. He's losing some patient referrals. He's not quite the only guy in town, and he was feeling the heat. And to add to his woes, only a month or two before that workshop I was speaking at, a guy flanked him on the other side, maybe 2 doors up or something, with his own sign, running a similar competitive service and promoted superior services. So he's like jammed in between these very aggressive, very ambitious competitors. And so I just left the table with a task. Like, get creative. Put your heads together. Help this miserable guy, would you? Like, work on a possibility. Give him one big idea to go home with that day, so that when he returns to his practice, he might have a way forward. He might feel some hope that his business isn't going to be the death of him. And I circled back an hour later. This guy was looking pretty different. He was like a bit peppy, moving around, chatting. I'm like, you look like things have changed. He's like, yeah, we found one big idea. We've decided I'm going to hang my own sign. I said, great. What's that going to say? And he showed me. And here's the point, right? All I encourage you to do today, this morning, right, in this little bit of time we have, is just get one big idea. Just one big idea. You don't have to copy down everything I say. You don't have to remember all the different points. It probably won't even come from me. It'll come from somebody else in the room. But get one big idea that tomorrow you can start thinking differently about, that you can kind of disrupt yourself with from this morning's experience. And then I think it's worthwhile for you. It's worth the investment of time, because that, my friends, is the most precious thing we have together. So my story, let me just share my story, really. And from that, distill a couple of things I've learned. Then we'll break, because John's asked me to speak for a fair amount this morning. Then we'll break, because I think we all just need to stretch our legs and maybe grab a drink. And then I'll come back and maybe use the whiteboard and workshop with you a couple of more transferable principles that I think will apply in all of your businesses as well. But my story, I introduced myself as a failed medical missionary, a very reluctant businessman, an accidental CEO. You're glad you got up this morning, aren't you? Right? This is really worth listening to. But a passionate physiotherapist. Like, I loved what I did. And all I had ever wanted to do was be in the medical game. And so I was a passionate physiotherapist. But the best place to start, really, pick up this story is my quarter-life crisis. John just spoke of his midlife crisis, or a midlife crisis. We know what that is, right? Midlife crisis looks like that. Midlife crisis typically is a workaholic male who wakes up one day, in his mid-40s and realizes as he looks in the mirror that his life is not going in the direction he had planned, and it doesn't mean as much to him as he thought it would. And he starts getting skin fades and wearing skinny jeans and no socks and probably goes and buys a Harley, right? Just saying, could be, might look like that. Well, I was an early bloomer. I didn't have a midlife crisis, fortunately. I had a quarter life crisis. So I'm 25 years of age. I've graduated as a physio. My wife, Paulina, who had immigrated from Brazil, was an intensive care nurse. We were married, we were planning, we were believing for big things, and we were now stuck, the best word to describe it, in a little home-based physio practice that was operating literally out of my carport, where a good mate had come over and just done some cladding of one half of the carport. I had exposed electrical wires that I hoped my patients wouldn't touch. There was secondhand carpet laid on the floor, a rickety old massage bed that would work as my therapeutic table. I was taking my first patient at 6 a.m. as the nurses that worked with Paulina wanted to be treated before they went on their day shift, and I'd see my last at 11 o'clock at night as they came off shift or needed help. I was working 6 days a week. I was burnt out. I was disillusioned. I was suffering this thing that we now know to be called FOMO, because all of my colleagues were traveling the world and having a great time and full of amazing stories. And I feel gridlocked in this prison without bars, this small little business happening at home. So I am having my quarter life crisis. To tell you what happens next, I have to go back in time a bit. I have to go back to when I was 10 years old. And on a morning, Saturdays, you guys would probably remember 6 o'clock in the morning, the Cartoon Connection. I used to get up before the household woke, grab my peanut butter toast, sit in the brown vinyl beanbag and watch TV all morning. And somewhere, and this is the early 80s, so you probably have had an experience not dissimilar, somewhere in the early 80s, between Roadrunner and Bugs Bunny, there were TV commercials that started to become very, very popular. World Vision ads of impoverished children. For less than a cup of coffee or $1 a day, you could adopt a child. And I'm seeing images like this. Children with distended bellies and frail limbs and flies buzzing all around their heads, and they're wobbling around and collapsing into the dirt, and big dust clouds are filling the camera, and then some celebrities looking down the barrel and they're challenging you to do something about it. And as a 10-year-old boy, mum and dad are asleep in the other room, I'm looking at this and I am distressed. I'm really overwhelmed with this problem. It did not make sense to me. Like, I'm thinking, where are their parents? Like, where are the hospitals? Why can't they just go to the supermarket and get food? Like, it didn't make any sense to me. I'm naive. For all I knew, Africa was just down the road and around the corner. Like, I had no context for the scale of this problem. But at 10 years of age, I distinctly remember, it is the first defining moment of my life, really. Honestly, there's no other way to state it. I remember praying a little prayer to God, and I didn't even know what that meant or who that was, and just said, I want to do something about that. Like, I want to be part of fixing that. It just grabbed my heart. And almost immediately, I made a decision. I'm going to become a doctor. That's the best way to fix this problem. I'm going to become a doctor, and I'm going to go cross-culturally, and I'm going to work in the developing world. And from that day forward, anybody who ever asked me, all the way through primary and secondary school, every teacher, every friend, every relative, you put them under a heat lamp at 3 o'clock in the morning and interrogate them, I guarantee you they'll all answer the question the same way when pressured. Oh yeah, we know what Jace wanted to grow up and become. He wanted to become a doctor so he could become a missionary. It consumed me. It became my identity. It was like this was the aviation fuel in my tank that propelled me. So it was pretty amazing when I met a wonderful girl who had a similar view, Paulina, who grew up amongst the favelas in Brazil and had seen abject poverty and wanted to spend her life doing something similar. We thought our match was perfect. The compatibility would be incredible. And so this is me at 10 years of age wanting to become a doctor to go across the world and help people. And yet at 25 years of age, like I had started to tell you, I'm having a quarter-life crisis because I'm stuck in Scoresby, which isn't even on the map. There is no East Link, right? In this tiny little suburb with this makeshift consulting room, working 6 days a week, hating every moment of it, feeling like I have disappointed everybody in my life. I've missed my calling. There's clearly something wrong with me because God hasn't deployed me like I thought he would into the developing world as a missionary. And I'm like, I'm not sure I can keep going. So I did what any logical person would do at that point, right? It's 25, honours student, $500,000 of revenue, 5 staff at this point, 30-page systems manual on how to run my practice. I gave the keys to a Kiwi guy. I went across the street to the hairdressers, shaved my head, bought a camper van, and ran away. Went around Australia for as long as I needed to be until I rediscovered what I was doing with my life. It was my quarter-life crisis. And I was up in Darwin 3 months later, thinking by now my money would have run out. Every time I went to fill up the tank at the service station in the combi, I'm thinking, oh, this is going to bounce. But fortunately, we kept being able to progress our trip. And one evening, as an electrical storm was brewing across Kakadu, we're walking along the foreshore up in Darwin, so we're halfway lapping the country. Paulina and I are walking, but not really talking, and I am more miserable than the guy that I was talking about in that workshop. I am distressed. I am feeling washed up and done for. And I'm complaining, not to Paulina, not verbally, but I am whinging about everything that hasn't turned out like I expected. And God must have been listening, because I felt like after I had finished my rant about why aren't I a doctor, or why can't I go and work in these voluntary teams across different parts of the developing world. I mean, we'd been to India, we'd been to Cambodia, I'd been to Eastern Europe, I'd worked for weeks at a time, but couldn't make any of it stick. I felt like God said to me, you know what, enough already. If that's what you really want to do, go. And I thought I had won the argument. I thought I had twisted his arm. I thought I had convinced him that this is going to work. And then I felt like there was a but. If you want to go, go. But the alternative is you stay home, you learn how to run an ethically profitable business out of the seed of what you've already got in the carport at home. You scale it nationally so that it becomes an economic engine that can send more than just you and your wife, and it might send 10 others, could maybe impact hundreds, if not thousands. And I couldn't really argue with the maths. And it was like a switch flick. Like, it's the best way to describe it, because I had spent 5 years kicking and screaming. And it was like instantly I just had a different perspective on my opportunity. And it's the second most defining moment of my life, because I convinced Paulina at that point, let's go straight home. Let's not continue this lap of Australia. Let's go straight home. We've got some work to do. And as my very long-suffering wife drove the camper van all the way home, through the Red Centre and back to Melbourne, I am lying on the bed at the back, filling an exercise book, 80 pages with the ramblings of a madman. All the stupid and out there ideas of how we could maybe do something with this little practice that we had started in our home. By the time we reached Melbourne, my language had changed. This is now full of possibility. I am talking to everybody and anybody who will stop long enough to listen. I was begging, borrowing, not stealing, but I was grabbing anyone's money who was willing to offer it to me. We collected $250,000, which was a lot of money back then for a lowly physio. It's probably still a reasonable amount of money today. And we poured it all into a state-of-the-art, custom-designed prototype practice that we hadn't seen done before in Melbourne. And, this little shack went to that. And I started spruiking the opportunity to every physio I knew, trying to invite them into this journey, this adventure. We started to think differently about how we treat patients. We were innovating our clinical philosophy. I was learning as much as I could about business, but what did I know? So I would go and have coffee and buy lunches to anybody who was willing to help me and mentor me. And I was on a mission. This is like the Blues Brothers, right? I am on a mission from God now. I'm going to try and build 100 practices around Australia on a innovative model that would allow us to achieve that original purpose of making a difference amongst the poorest of the poor. And, we kept building these centres and gathering people around us. It took me 5 years to run one practice, to get one practice to profitable sustainability. 5 years. In year 6, we did 6. And they were not legally compliant, bona fide franchises. My lawyer would shudder. It was a cowboy agreement that I wrote by cut and pasting things I saw on the internet. By year 3, we did 14 under now compliant documentation, because we realised this is going somewhere, worth the investment. It was like getting on a Harley, revving this thing to top speed and holding on for everything you could, right? It was the beginning of the great adventure. And, some great people came into our world. And wouldn't it be awesome if I could just keep telling you how amazing things went from there? Like that this was just all up and up. Wouldn't that be a great morning? Because you'd go home feeling so inspired that all is not lost. But that wouldn't be true. In fact, I find most people get more encouraged out of the things that didn't go well than the things that supposedly, social media suggest, it was all glossy and bright and shiny. It wasn't. But let me tell you some things I learnt at this point in the journey. 3 things I want you to hear. Because a lot of people introduce me as an entrepreneur. And frankly, I can't even spell the word, let alone defend myself as being one. We often think of entrepreneurship as, these outrageous risk takers, these people who are so genius that they can disrupt and innovate and they can see into the future and they have got this all worked out from the beginning, and we just stand in awe of this entrepreneur, right? Well, if that's what an entrepreneur is, I do not qualify. I was a desperate man running away from a situation that I felt stuck in, convinced that I had missed all of my opportunities and had taken wrong turns, right? And yet here we were now holding the beginnings of a fast-growing commercial opportunity. And here's the first thing that I learned, and this is what I would like to suggest to you is one of the core attributes of an authentic entrepreneur. And it's up there, conviction. To me, it is far more important that your business hinges on a compelling personal conviction than it does that you have a glossy, elegant vision statement. They are not the same thing. Vision and mission, all of which I encourage you to have, are pictures of the future that you might be able to achieve. They are aspiration. They can be motivational. They are things that you should be targeting and setting goals around. And it's full of hope and possibility. But there's no guarantee, there's no certainty, right? But that's okay. That's nice to have something to aim for. But if a vision is something you could do, conviction is something you must do. It's different. It's a different animal. See, no matter how hard it gets, no matter how many obstacles you face, no matter criticism you get, no matter how many times you go to the line on solvency, conviction says, I have no choice. I must do this. This is who I am. This is what I'm here for. This is my purpose, not just my activity. It's not just a possibility. You can't deny the conviction. And I tell you, that makes you dangerous. That makes you formidable. That is more than just a determined, ambitious, hard-working entrepreneur. That makes you impossible to overcome, no matter how bad it gets. So I'd like to suggest to you, conviction is pretty important. If you have a pen or a phone, why don't you just take like 30 seconds to put your best one-sentence expression of what you think is the conviction, not just behind your business, but your life. Like if maybe it's a key word, maybe it's a thought, maybe it's a picture, I don't know. But what's your conviction? Because if you don't have one, if you don't know what it is, if you haven't done the time to put words around it, I think it's going to reveal some vulnerabilities in the journey of running your business. But just take 30 seconds. I'll pause. I won't talk. I won't ask you to share it now, but it might bubble up in your conversations at the table. The second thing that I think is absolutely critical is that you have creativity. Again, don't put yourselves under too much pressure here. You don't have to solve every problem. You don't have to be a genius who can see the end from the beginning like, we're often told we need. But you need to develop the sense of being able to look around corners a little bit. Imagine what it is that your business can solve that nobody else is attending to. You need to give yourself permission to fail at some things before you might actually get it right. Because if you're going to run your business, your model, your product, your service the same way as everybody else, how do you differentiate? This is not new information. You've heard this, you've read this. It's cliche. So we have to develop some creativity. You have to have a mark of distinction about what it is you do or provide. What is going to be that signature attribute of what it is you do that is so creative? With your pen or your fingers on your phone, what's the most creative thing you've done in the last 2 years? What's the most creative, unpredictable, possibly chaotic, disruptive, innovative, risk-taking, unexpected, non-conventional, counterintuitive thing you have done in the last 2 years? If you can't think of something, we have a problem. But we must demand of ourselves progressive practice around being creative. Could be in the way you resolved a conflict. It could be in the way you built a new relationship. It could be in the way you marketed a service. It could be in the way you designed a product. It doesn't really matter. It's exercising the attribute. Bless you. Because why bother nurture a conviction if you're not going to put the energy into the creative expression of how you're going to live that out? And the world needs you. It needs your uniqueness. It needs your particular mix of experience, perspective, hurts and successes. All the things that make you uniquely you positions you to have a creative stake on how to live out that conviction that nobody else will be able to fill. You have an opportunity. The question is, have you identified? And then the third attribute is this one of courage. The 3 C's, I will go all day on those 3 C's if you want me to. The triad, right, of entrepreneurship. Why be creative if you're not going to do something with that? If you're not going to actually implement? If you're not going to take action? If the first time you do, you get knocked back, or it doesn't work, or people tell you you're stupid. Like, you need courage disproportionate to just about anything else if you're going to swim upstream and run your business all the way to its full potential. Courage. And of course, courage isn't the absence of fear, is it? It's okay to, let's agree, let's accept. We're afraid just about all the time about something. So courage is not the absence of fear, it's the willingness to follow the conviction in spite of it. To go where it's hard. Because you'll find very few others who make it or even are willing to embrace it. So you distinguish yourself with the boldness of what it means to keep going when everybody else gives up. Ask yourself, right now, in the context of your business, what are you most afraid of? Right now, what are you most afraid of? Write it down. Something is going to keep you up at night. Something is worrying you. You are distracted by it. You are catastrophizing. You know, if you had the magic wand and you could wave and fix something, what is it? Already, if you understand and do something with the significance of your conviction, mixed in a little cocktail with some creativity and the courage, you put yourself in the distinct minority of people who can go out of here and do some pretty extraordinary things. Not because you can tell the story, not because you can repeat the words, not because you know the theory, not because you bought the book or wrote the book, but because you actually put it into practice. It puts you in the distinct minority. And it almost doesn't matter what your product or service or brand or sector is, you have just opened up trajectory for high performance like probably nothing else will do for you. But let's be real here for a minute, because my best metaphor for running business is that it is like a game of snakes and ladders. Like, I remember I used to wake up in the morning, my wife would kind of make sure I'm ready for the day and send me off, and it was like rolling the dice every morning, not knowing quite what you were walking into. And on the way to work, you get the text message resignation from one of your most senior staff members. Or you walk into the practice and it's been burgled and everything's missing. It's ransacked. Or you get a phone call from the bank and they're pulling their overdraft or their line of credit because you haven't met your covenants. And it's like rolling the dice, getting a 3, moving those spaces, landing on the head of a snake and sliding all the way backwards 5 paces. And you're like, how does that happen? How is so much of this out of my control? It is the luck of the dice, and it doesn't matter how convicted I am about what I'm meant to do and how creative I thought I was and all this courage, and I've gone backwards. Is that just me? I spent my career moving backwards more often than I felt like I went forwards. That's my experience. I was afraid to get out of bed some morning, not knowing what number I would roll and where it would land me. But you know, for as many times as you hit a snake, you roll the dice, you roll a 6, you move ahead, and you land on the foot of a ladder and you catapult up. True? It's a game of snakes and ladders. You know, someone you haven't seen in 10 years rings you and says, I'm moving back into the country, I'm looking for a job, and they become your superstar rainmaker that kind of helps create all this opportunity inside your business. Or, you know, you have a windfall contract that lands and you make more revenue and profit than you had budgeted, right? Or a contract comes up with RMIT and you're like, Dave was telling me this morning, and it's like you've been working on this for 5 years and now all the ducks are lining up. It can feel like chance. It can feel like luck. It can feel like you're not in control, to which I say even more so those attributes of conviction and of creativity and of courage become the keel that holds you in the uncertainties. But just for a moment, relax, you're normal, right? That's normal. That is the cut and thrust, the rough and tumble, the blood sport of running business. And it's not for the faint-hearted. It is a full contact sport. So you are in it because you have to accept this. You have to acknowledge this. You know, for us, over the next 10 years of having got from that little beachhead of 14 practices where I thought, wow, I've already gone further in this little business than I ever thought I would, we started to face so much opposition. Franchising in healthcare, I was of the devil, right? It's the dirty F word. You should not commercialize a noble thing such as healthcare. It just hadn't been done very much. To monetize or profiteer off people's pain, the intelligentsia had a very dim view on that. Blacklisted from all the guest lecturing I did at universities. You know, they were actively campaigning against the new graduates not to come and work for us. I talked about burglary. We had a serial burglar. I bought 150 flat screen TVs once off a guy to fill all of our practices with, you know, TVs for waiting rooms and whatnot. And somebody knew something that they shouldn't have, because we sequentially lost all of our TVs from each practice. One practice, poor guy, he put in a TV after a TV and after a TV. Every time one got stolen, he replaced it from our warehouse, and he lost 3 consecutive TVs in 3 consecutive weeks. Smashed glass, the whole lot. I walked into a practice one day and there was an axe through our reception desk. We weren't just burgled, we were vandalized. We had superintendents from the CIB turn up, and I'm like, can you find my ultrasounds? Can you find all our medical equipment? They're like, it'll be on the medical secondhand black market in Sydney by tomorrow morning, mate. They are gone. Like, we have had some hard times. The opening story about the text message as I came off my 2-dive excursion in Fiji and saw that horrible headline flash across the Sydney Morning Herald. 2 years, Warren. 2 years we spent defending ourselves. The fact that it wasn't true didn't matter. It was credible. It was in the paper. And all of our franchisees actually rallied behind it. They wrote their own testimonials, their own submissions to the parliamentary inquiry. They told of the fact that they were having great experiences and feeling like this was the right environment. And we were vindicated and we survived and we lived to fight another day. But it's the pain, right, between the here and the there. If that's your world, let me just assure you, but we had some great times. We won national awards. We were doing research and development in clinical areas. We published studies, wrote some books, got some acclaim, ended up getting better media. It's just a... You can't measure your progress on the fickle signals of the world around you. You have to go back to your conviction and ask yourself whether you're doing what you are meant to be doing, not what just you could do, and not to be blown by the winds of change around you. And this is part of the journey of running your businesses. In 2013, good little reminder, you know what? There aren't any ups and downs in your life. You're probably dead. No one wants to flatline. So get on the roller coaster. Okay? We've just come back from Disney World in Florida and we have some very, very humorous photos. I'd like to say of just the kids, but of Paulina and me, horrified as the camera snaps you as you go down the roller coasters. But you know what? The merry-go-round, safe. But doesn't go anywhere and you'll end up vomiting anyway, right? So take the roller coaster. It's part of the journey. But, in 2013, I gave myself some long overdue, long service leave. Paulina and I took the kids to South America for 3 months, and stepping out of the business is a healthy way of getting some objective perspective on what's going on. We'd been not just running our business, we spent 10 years working with Indigenous communities, using some of our experience in business and the resources it was generating to come full circle and start delivering on the very conviction and promise we launched this thing with in the first place. Serve the needs of the poor, get involved in the worlds where we thought we could make a difference. We were running projects in India, Nepal, Thailand, Cambodia. We were stretched very, very thinly and I was feeling incredibly exhausted. So we had time away. And so here I was in South America having a good 3 months, all the while the cat's away, the mice were playing. And I came home after 3 months feeling refreshed and ready to keep running my business, and my executive team had imploded in my absence. Mea culpa, like it's on me. I clearly hadn't set it up right. But what does a physio know about business? So we had about 40 practices at this point, maybe 25 million of revenue. We had a traditional exec team in place and I was functioning as some pseudo CEO trying to keep it all together. And when I returned, there had been so much internal rivalry and positioning and ego at work as they were trying to, one-up each other, that the unity, the flow, the teammanship within the organization had all but evaporated. And I won't linger on this, but I have written about it, so I'm pretty open. It was probably the hardest year of my life in my business to come home and see everything that had been, projecting in the right direction was now starting to fall apart. And the point of that story is not that you shouldn't have a 3-month holiday. In fact, in that absence, not only did it reveal some of the fundamental gaps in my leadership and the way we had structured the business, it had also given me a fresh insight into what I wanted to do and where I wanted to go with this business. And unbeknownst to them, while they were falling apart behind the scenes, I had committed to myself of returning and doubling our network in 3 years that had taken us 12 years to get to that point. That's called a collision course. You know, that is two opposing forces going head on. I came home, I spent the next 12 months releasing team members, restructuring the business, dismantling hierarchy, detitling everybody who had used their position description as illegitimate authority. I didn't go flat. I went spherical. Again, it's another story. It's not today's point because it'll take a long time to unpack. But I, ignited a revolution inside my own business. I was lighting fuses and setting off grenades everywhere. I looked like I was sabotaging everything that we had relied on to have got to that point, and the intentional blowing up of it allowed us to think radically differently about how we were going to grow into the next chapter. I found new people with fresh vision, the right values, and we set this objective 750-100. Which is just a cute acronym, right? It just says we want to be in 7 states and territories. We want to deliver $50 million worth of services per annum and want to have 100 flagship practices. And guys, no biggie, 3 years. Let's just get this done. Why? Because I had a conviction we could do more in the developing world, which means we're going to have to be creative like we had never been before. And if we didn't already show courage, it was going to be demanded at a whole other level. Cut forward to the good bit, right? We more than exceeded our target. 3 years later, we not only covered or had flagships in every capital city of Australia, we had launched into New Zealand, we had signed heads of agreements in the UK, we had interest in Canada, and South Africa were looking at licensing our intellectual property. We had $60 million worth of services in that first year in 140 locations. And it just reminded me that what we think is unachievable or impossible, we limit ourselves for the most part. And it won't always be the story you get to tell, right? Because if I pick any other 3-year period in the 22 years I've been in the business, I can assure you it's not that glamorous. But sometimes it all comes together for purpose when it's needed, and it resets the possibilities. And it's good to remember that. After experiencing that one team, it's what we called the new approach to leading and managing inside our business. There were so many lessons I learned. I sat down one day and I started listing them like a laundry list. What have I learnt in this 3 years? Because it was tough. The result was fantastic. Wish I could just leave it there. But the pain we had to go through to get there was excruciating. And one of my board advisors said to me, you know what, you should take stock of that, because otherwise you're probably going to have to do another lap to get the insights you've just had. And that motivated me to pull out a pen and paper pretty quickly. I ended up with a list. And I'm not exaggerating because there's evidence on the table over there, a list of 50 things I learned as I went to hell and back to grow the business in that period. Let me just give you a handful, right? Really quick. I'm not going to labor the point, but if any of these messages resonate for where you're at, just scribble down something and you can talk about them in the second session if they're relevant. Let me just give you a real quick overview of like half a dozen. One of the lessons: size of your business is the enemy of collective direction and alignment. That is, the bigger you get, the more diluted people's understanding of what you believe, where you're going, and why you do it. Enemy. The enemy of growth and unity is size. So you become a victim of your own success. The bigger you get, in my case, a very geographically distributed business, team members all over the country and now over the water. It ain't hard to keep them all singing off the same hymn sheet. So my job that I could never let up on was to keep messaging our conviction, our message, and understand that was the most important thing I could ever do. And the day I stopped repeating it and reinforcing it and rewarding it was the day I'd get mission drift inside my organization, the great dilution effect. Size is the enemy of direction and alignment. Second lesson, the best form of leadership is truth. I used to think my job was to package the hardships that we were enduring as a business in a way that made people feel comfortable and told them it would all be okay and give them the positive spin and protect them. But your people are smarter than you. They know that there's trouble in the camp. They know there's hostile competitors. They know the economic winds aren't blowing in your favor. They know when you're having a bad day. And it took me a little while to get comfortable with this idea that the best form of leadership I can bring to my people is that of truth. That is, let me be candid. Let me be transparent. Let me tell you how it really is. Let me invite you into an experience where I can trust you to have a mature understanding of what's going on. I disclose my financials. I talk about some of our legal strife. I'm open about my disappointments. And people I become more relatable and they become more insightful. The best form of leadership is truth. Don't tell them what you think they want to hear. Tell them what is. How's this one? The owner, the CEO, the manager, whatever responsibility you carry, you must decrease if you want your team to increase. It's just a principle. The more you do, the less is required of them. So we all want the same thing here. We want a highly empowered, highly performing, self-directed team, don't we? And yet, we don't give them the opportunity to exercise the muscles, to develop the capabilities to become that. So you have to decrease in your business for them to increase. I went as far in that 3-year period when we were setting an unreasonable growth target of not only trying to live that principle in the way I distributed authority across the organization, I went as far as modeling it tangibly in the way we set the office up. Like, no reserved car spaces anymore, literally pulled down plaster and stud walls, no big CEO office with couches and, desks, like sit in the bullpen with everybody else. In fact, I had the most obscure roles within the team projects because I realized I had to decrease if I wanted them to step up. It's a truism. It took me a long time to learn it. But as I let go, they took up and we became a more shared contributors. What about this one? Most leaders assume the culture of their team and business is better than it really is. There's a study published here in Australia based on a whole bunch of research in the US and the cross-section of corporate Australia, and it found that CEOs, on average, overestimate the health of their culture by about 12%. That is, if I surveyed you, you would give me a more positive impression of what people thought and how people behaved than what those on the ground would survey. Which means you have a rose-coloured perspective. You're actually not one of them. And they think differently. So don't be fooled. Don't overestimate the health of your organisation. assume there's more work to be done because they're talking in the lunchroom and having the pillow talk in the evenings that it's not as good as you think it is. Let me give you two more really quick ones. Being well precedes doing well. We are really good, I'm sure, in this room at setting KPIs and growth targets and strategic plans, and really good at putting action lists together and giving people jobs to do, right? Great. All part of the ordinary mechanics of business. But being well precedes doing well in all of these things. Take it from a physio, right? It's my trade. We are body, soul, and spirit. Regardless of what worldview or religious background or, ideology you subscribe to, most people accept that we are made up of three parts: body, soul, and spirit. Okay? We are inherently a spirit. That's where your beliefs, your convictions, your values, the true you actually lives. And you have a soul, which is your mind, your will, and your emotions, the things that seek to influence that spirit. And you live in a body, right? And if we don't look after all three dimensions of who we are, it starts to fall apart. You start to be more than just suboptimal. You start to become, quite frankly, ineffective. And so with your people, quite apart from yourself, what are you doing to promote optimal lifelong health of the body, the soul, spirit? Because being well, we're human beings, not human doings in the first instance. Being well precedes doing well. If your people are inherently healthy, then they will bring their best contribution to the workplace. And they will surprise you with how much that they can achieve. Last lesson, and then you can otherwise take a book if you want. And for the record, if you can't afford one, it's my gift to you, right? So whatever you need to do, there's a few there. I came on the motorbike, so I could only bring a couple. But if you want to see the other lessons, take it. Last one, change is inevitable, but progress is optional. So if you think you've finally got the business and the team and the culture and the model right, my suggestion today is don't breathe, right? Because the moment you just take one more decision or move one more inch, it's probably so fragile it's about to all unravel, because these things are not set and forget. But even if you've got it all right, let me assure you there is more change to come. The world keeps moving. Your customers only have more expectations. If you've just had your best year yet, I assure you, people will expect more of you the year after, right? Change is inevitable. You have to keep innovating. You have to keep striving. Progress is optional. Progress is optional. So you can change in the wrong direction if you're not careful. Change is not the objective. So don't be one of these change addicts who just thinks, I've just got to keep shifting things up. I've just got to keep, keeping them guessing. I've got to keep iterating my model. No. Just be wary. Not all change is good change. In my case, I had to wrestle a lot of poor choices on my part before I found the change that would actually progress us. More lessons I could give you. Time is going to be against me, so let me finish my story and get you to a stretch break. A couple of years ago, almost to the day, we're in the heart of COVID. We're running about 140 locations. I am working 8-day weeks. You know what that's like, right? I would literally not go to sleep on a Tuesday night. I had a deal with my wife. I'd be home for dinner with the kids. We'd do the whole thing, 8 o'clock. I'm off the hook and I'm back in the office just on a Tuesday night, and I would work all the way through because I'd get no calls, no interruptions. I'd have no people to care for, and I could smash out all those legal documents and all those strategic plans and all those problems that needed to be solved. I was working 8 days a week, and it wasn't sustainable. And that little pesky virus turns up and starts to interfere with all of our lives. Coronavirus. And I don't say this lightly, because I understand everybody had a different experience in that 2 years. But I can't not tell you my story. In a world where some people were doing it extremely tough and facing unbearable hardship, and I know some of those people, I've journeyed with them. Our business got really complicated because we're acting in lots of different jurisdictions and we're in healthcare, and therefore we have lots of compliance to attend to. But we grew 25%. I don't say that to boast. It just is. We grew. We continue to explode such that it attracted the interest of some unsolicited offers for people to buy our business, which wasn't what I was looking for at the time, but it was hard to ignore. And after 2 or 3 of those, it was pretty clear at how attractive those propositions were, that when we sat in council and considered our position, we wondered, if we ran a formal process, I wonder how much better it could be. Warren and a whole bunch of people from PwC and KPMG all got together and we ran this kind of silent auction in the background. There was a few leaks in the AFR, but for the most part, we kept it under wraps. We ended up with 93 different potential parties interested in our business, which meant we had a pretty good bidding war in our favour. We had 20 formal expressions of interest by the middle of 21, when COVID was at its absolute peak in terms of impact on our economy and our well-being as a nation. We chose our preferred partner and we ended up transacting on a deal that allowed us to eventually put our brand into an ASX or listed environment, which meant lots of possibilities for our franchisees and their families, and for me and my family. And we merged with other larger healthcare organisations to form an entirely new set of possibilities. All of which, 2 years on, I would just simply say was fantastic for us in lots of different ways. But I say that because I couldn't have imagined it. It wasn't my plan. It's not, oh, what a great entrepreneur, Jason. No. I just fell over myself one step after another with a conviction of why I was doing what I was doing. Creativity to keep solving problems that nobody else was fixing. And courage to bang through the walls every time another one appeared in front of me. Not assured of any outcome, but because it's what I was meant to do. I felt compelled. This is what I was meant to do. It was all part of fulfilling what that little 10-year-old boy had committed to God when he saw the distress of people without anything. And this is a little part that my wife and our family get to play in that great injustice. And so business is not something that you should serve. Business is there to serve you and your convictions. It's there as the great enabler of what you believe and the dent you want to make in the world, as we often hear said. And so we get to the end of that story, and I don't know if you know anything of this brand Healthier that we amalgamated with, who have just announced actually a $250 million private equity offer that they're entertaining. I mean, it's amazing how things can scale and escalate when you feel like you are bringing your best self to it all. So let me close this out, and I'll give you the moment for a few questions before we split if you want to. But you know that V-Rod that I wished was here, that I could have revved up for you and blown the windows out up here? It goes 0 to 100. Listen to this. It goes 0 to 100 in 3.4 seconds, if you know how to ride it. All right? If you can stay on. Like the G-force on it. I put my kids on the back, my wife occasionally. Let me tell you, they are shocked at the pace on this thing. Warren's had a ride. We probably didn't go quite that fast, but 0 to 100 in 3.4 seconds. Back in motion, we went 0 to 100. A little bit slower than that. Took 20 years. but the adventure, the thrill, the exhilaration, the risk, the vulnerability, the danger, right, exceeds getting on a motorbike on cue. See what I did for you guys? Do you see how hard I've programmed this morning? Right? It exceeds anything you could do on a bike. So you are in the most exciting opportunity, right? No matter where you are along the spectrum. It's just a question of how you bring these attributes together regularly. And when we break, you can gather your thoughts. But what I want to do in the second part is forget my story. I just want to give you the 10 principles of how you can ignite a revolution in your business by blowing up everything that's held you back in the way we think about team, okay? And I've learnt it the hard way. I haven't learnt it from a book. I've written the book, but had to learn it through the blood, sweat, and tears. So I'll just share that really quickly, and I'm going to let you think and talk about it together and ask some questions on it, and we'll finish the morning on that basis. But before we split right now, is there anyone who wants to ask me anything about the story? Because once we come back, it's not about me, it's about you. Yeah. It comes back to this, and I'm sorry to repeat myself, but I'm really not that complicated. I'm a simple guy. It comes back to my conviction. I did what I felt like God had purposed me to do. So from that really young age, it wasn't about being clever in business because I'm really not that smart. It wasn't about being building a brand in physiotherapy because that was my preferred profession. I actually wanted to be a doctor. Like, I was just a series of disappointments, frankly. But I believed that I did have something to contribute to those who were amongst the most disadvantaged in the world. And this business was a means to an end. Obviously, you have to commit everything if you're going into something so high stakes. We had 700 people on a payroll that I couldn't at a whim decide to just, give it all away. But the purpose behind it was the fuel that kept me going. I love the picture of a rhino. This is a bit off. But we sing the song Eye of the Tiger. Think about Eye of the Rhino. If you know anything about a rhino, they are only able to see about 2 meters in front. And they're about 2 ton of animal. And you have a herd of sheep and a flock of geese. You know what they call a group of rhinos? Crack. Because when those things get up and get going, the momentum, like the critical mass of those things means when at 2 meters in front is all they can see, a tree happens to appear, they don't have time to go around it. They can't pull up. They just crash through it. And I love this picture in business when you have clarified your mission, your purpose, your values, your conviction. You might not be able to see the whole journey. I couldn't. There's no way if you'd talked to me 2.5 years ago, I would have said, we'll be on the listed exchange and I'll be out and happy day. No. But I could only see 2 meters in front. But I had enough momentum that when the obstacles would come up, we could just keep crashing through them. It was my fuel. And I'd love to be able to sound more sophisticated than that, but that's what it is. God is my purpose behind it. Mm-hmm. She likes to be referred to as the seed investor. We went 2 years. I did not draw an income. You'd be familiar with this. This is your experience, right? When you start a business, there's no money for you. It all gets reinvested. I was paying receptionists more than I was paying myself for right up until the 5th year. So Paulina worked 12-hour shift at the intensive care unit, earned about 35 grand a year. This is 2 decades ago. We are pre-kids at this point, and we lived entirely off her wage, and I invested every cent back into the business. So to that extent, it would have been impossible to do it without her. But more than that, she would then come and work the reception. She would help me with the books because what do I know? a dumb physio, right? Like, she would write the systems manuals that would eventually become the basis of our franchising infrastructure. She was totally involved. Then we had kids, and that became her full-time commitment. And it wasn't until those kids got a little bit older, she returned onto our advisory board so that she could boss me around every month. And I didn't have to go home and tell her my distorted views of the decisions that we had collectively made. She was in the room, which was fantastic, right through to the very end, right through to the signing off of the transaction. Dave. Warren will tell you an untrue story later, but because he is one of our commercial advisors. But I think you need to differentiate advisors. So I have mentors and I have commercial advisors. And of course, they're not the same thing. So mentors are there to journey with me in life, develop the man, hold accountable the character, hug me when I'm crying and kick me up the bum when I'm lazy, and celebrate with me when we have a win, right? They are really there for me, the man, the person, not back in motion the business. And I choose them on the basis of faith and values and chemistry around the long term, because that's not a short-term engagement. That's not, a 12-month interaction. That's hopefully as close to a lifelong relationship as they will allow, because I rely on that. Then you have your commercial advisors, lawyers, accountants, franchise consultants, financial planners, all of which you want to be values aligned, but otherwise you want their expertise. And my favorite little comment here is I will take advice from all of those people, but I'll still make my own decision because I have my convictions. I know where I'm going. I know what's important, but I need their expertise. So it's silly to outsource the decision as much as you want to bring in their perspective. So I can sometimes get competing views from advisors. I must make my own decision. Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, there's nothing like a personal referral. There's nothing like somebody else who's had an experience, who you trust, who shares that with you, who builds credibility in that choice to give you confidence to proceed. In the absence of that, you suck it up, you have a go, you measure closely, and you hire slowly and fire quickly.
Yeah.
Last question, then we're going to break. Last question. Yeah, Sel.
Something I guess you didn't talk about, but was for me, the back in motion sounds, yes, for, it tells them what the business does, right? But once hearing your story, it's kind of you went back into motion of every time, something pulls you back and you were going back into motion. Did that have anything to do with it, or was it just my perception after hearing your story?
What, the name? I spent most of my journey regretting the name. Yeah. My wife and my sister compete for the bragging rights of who came up with the name. Either way, it was when we were at the very beginning sharing pizzas late on a Friday night, kicking around all of the cute little possibilities of a play on words, and Back in Motion won on the night. And then I spent the next 2 decades regretting it because we did a lot more than just backs. And we ended up with such a diverse, multidisciplinary range of services, from the feet to the psychology, that I thought backs misrepresented who we were. But you know what? I don't know what Apple is either. Who are the McDonald's brothers? Like, at the end of the day, a name's a name. If you can build a brand and make it stick, so be it. So I didn't lose too much sleep over it. But I don't think there was any more significance in the name than that. All right, I reckon we break, and I'm still here, and we're coming back because John wants me to do a bit more of an interactive workshop. But I thought, you've heard my story, you've got some context. Hopefully it probes in your world a few ideas and thoughts. And I'm happy to answer questions in the break too.